Hey there, it's comic historian Trevor Getz. How you doing? I'm sitting in front of the window here. It's pretty boring, but that's because I've run out of creative and interesting places to sit when I do these videos. Now, we've talked about how comics can tell a story, talked about how they use art and text together in a multimodal way to tell a story. We haven't talked about how comics tell stories that are good history. And so our last video here of the trilogy is comics as history. Now, there are lots of ways to communicate about history, don't get me wrong. And I'm not saying that comics are better than documentaries or textbooks or scholarly articles, but they're unique. And I want to tell you why. And I want to tell you what that means about how comics can be histories. So the main point to begin with is that historical comics provide lots of entry points into history, more than just text or images alone. When you look at a page that's a comic page, you might find lots of start places. You might, focus on a map. You might focus on, in this case, there's a photograph there that's an actual sort of historical photograph built into the page. You might start on the image of the author intervening into the page. You might start on some of the text. There's all kinds of places that you can start. And to begin with, that awakens your curiosity. It asks you to ask questions about comics. It provides all of these entry points for thinking about the past. So I want to talk about these entry points and these opportunities to get into historical accounts through comics. And to do so, I'm actually going to use one of my own graphic histories, First Black Marines, which is based on oral histories of the first African Americans allowed into the US Marine Corps between 1942 and 1949 at the height of the Second World War. Previously, the Marine Corps had been a segregated whites-only organization. So I'm going to talk to you as a creator of comics, as well as a historian and a lover and reader of comics. So here are some ways I think about comics as history. So first of all, comics are uniquely able to convey emotions and empathetic ideas. They create historical empathy. They help us to get into the minds and the hearts of the people who we're talking about. I mean, look, they have faces, right, to begin with. Images with faces accompanied by text that pulls us along in the story. So here's an example. This is one of the Marines I interviewed, veteran Carol Braxton, a man in his late 90s, almost 100, remembering what it was like to hit the beaches on Saipan Island under fire 80 years ago. It's just about the 80th anniversary of this event. And yet we can see in this image that's taken from the video footage of the interview, actually, we can see in his eyes the emotion of that memory of his suffering and the suffering of the people with him in the past. So yeah, comics are emotional, and yet history is emotional too, right? It's not just dry and objective. It's about how people felt and thought as well as what they did. So that's the first thing. The second thing is that comics allow us to think about our relationships to the past because they can uniquely connect two periods of time in the same place. So they're sequential, one thing happens after another, but they can also be simultaneous. They can put in the same page, Braxton again today talking about these young recruits who had grown up in poverty and discrimination, who were just kind of pushed into the Marine Corps, conscripted into the Marine Corps, who didn't even know what was going on with the war. And he's remembering this. You can see him in the present. You can see his relationship to the story of the past of these two young recruits who he helped to actually go and to learn to read while they were in boot camp. And so this ability to put the past and the present into the same page, or two different times into the same page, is something that's unique and amazing for comics. And building on that story, we can talk about how comics put the historian or allow the historian or creator to be present as well. So here's a page where we see a different veteran, First Sergeant Jack McDowell, remembering the moment when he was pulled into a room and told, okay, you've been in a Black only unit. We want you to be in this first integrated unit in the US Marine Corps after the Second World War. And so Jack's there, and we see the past. But what you also see there are two historians, my co-author, Rob Willis, and I, both of us there as part of the story, interjecting with the story. And the reason that that's important, and you'll see a lot of comic creators doing it, is that it makes visible the way in which this is a history as an act of interpretation. All histories interpret the past. All histories have bias. All history have the viewpoint of the historian, the person who's creating it. But comics almost uniquely allow the creator to be there so that the reader can see their biases, can see where they're coming from, can see what they want you to know. And that helps you to understand that this history is an act of interpretation. And then getting back to visual metaphor. Remember, we talked a lot in the last video about visual metaphor. So if you slow down on a page, so this is a page that's got an iconic photograph in it, right? The photograph of the Marines raising the flag atop the mountain in Iwo Jima, having won a hard-fought victory. It's one of the most amazing photographs, important photographs maybe in US history. But there were people absent from that photograph, people who landed on the same island under the same fire as those white Marines. And they were the Black Marines whose job it was at the time to carry ammunition, to carry stretchers, to take the wounded off the beach. And we wanted to make them present in the story, to talk about the fact that they are silenced, but they are there. And so we created this huge visual metaphor. The artist Liz Clark worked with me to really imagine what this would look like. And so these visual metaphors, again, they're another advantage that comics have in talking about history. Comics are also really good at revealing the mechanics behind the history. And that's because you can integrate primary sources into your comic, whether it's a photograph or something visual or something written, right? And so you can see those primary sources. You can see those primary sources illustrated, not just as text, but also illustrations of them, to help you understand the way in which we have used these sources from the past to construct the story. So here on this page, you have excerpts from 3 letters from Black servicemen, mostly at camps in the US South, talking about how they were treated. And some of these letters were sent to African-American newspapers. A lot of them were sent home to mothers and to family members, talking about that treatment. You can see the actual source itself, right, in a way that pulls you in through the images. And this ability to show primary sources behind the scenes is another way in which the comic can actually add to your historical interpretation. And then much more simply, of course, comics are great for showing time and space, right? So comics can have a map, like this map on the left, showing how some of the veterans that we interviewed got to Camp Montford Point, where they were going through the segregated boot camp. So, you know, there you have a visualization of space, or on the right, we have a visualization of time through a timeline. Comics can allow the creator to show these things to help contextualize, to help show how there was continuity and change over time so that the reader can understand what was going on better. And similarly, you can show other kinds of narrative visualizations. This is a visualization of how the whole comic got made in the end. It starts with Jack McDowell joining the Marine Corps in 1945 and goes all the way through his service to the moment in which he kind of enlisted us as historians to tell his story, and we found other people to work with us. And it's a diagram rather than a map or a timeline. But again, it shows that kind of narrative arc, which comics are so good at doing. So at this point, what I want to say is that you have some other comics probably that you want to look at, or that teacher may want you to look at. And as you look at them, I want you to think about the way in which choices are being made by the creators in the comics you're looking at. How are art and text combined? How is the page laid out in panels and balloons and gutters and symbols? And how are the pages designed to be histories to interact with the past? And I want you to take it seriously. But again, I also want to have fun with it. Comics are a way of communicating ideas and thoughts and emotions and experiences. And, my hope is that you'll just enjoy them more. You'll find it a lot richer. You'll find it a lot richer if you are open and ready to learn from them as well, but also to engage them with joy and perhaps sadness and certainly sincerity. So at this point, I will sign off and say good luck and thank you for joining me.